Hi, and welcome to the Unhinged History Podcast, the podcast where your hosts spend the entire week binging whatever history thing that they have thought of and thought the other one might find as enjoyable as they do. And then we try to surprise each other. So I am host number one. I'm Theresa.
I'm host number two, and I am Angie. Surprise!
Ha! It's still
Gotcha.
us.
You didn't think it was us this week, did you? My new goal is to make her laugh while she's doing the intro because she likes to mess with me. So if I can get her to stumble through something, I'm winning.
You know, I don't know if mess with you is my goal. My goal is, gosh, what the heck did I say last time? So I'm just going to come up with something, and it's never the same. And because it's so off kilter, I think that's what gets you.
You know what? I think you're probably right.
Because I think
off kilter, yeah.
Even in my birthday cards, you mentioned something about just the metaphors I come up with that throw you.
Because listen, your metaphors are like, I was going to say hilarious poetry, but that doesn't even give it like half of its due. Like, your metaphors are a thing of beauty. Like, and I never know when I'm going to get one. So I'm always like, wait, what you going to say today?
To be fair, I never know when I'm going to get one.
Oh, that's what makes it fun. It's a surprise for all of us.
Right. I mean, there are times I will say something and I'll go, oh, that's how I'm feeling. All right.
All right. Well, now we know. Moving on.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to go with this today.
And that's like the weird part of being an introverted external processor. Like, I don't want to talk to people, but to know what's going on in my own head, I have to speak to others. And so that's a weird dichotomy.
I'm just thankful for the husband because he gets it. He's like, yep, work it out. I'm right here. But he doesn't even have to say anything. He just sits there.
Hubs will look at me because, I'm gearing up for knee surgery, and he'll just be like, you're in pain. I know yeah, well, I am. I'm gonna go get you some Tylenol.
Yep. Oh, the amount of times Ian's been like, listen, this is what you're really mad about, or this is what you're really thinking about. Like, just come on now, get it out. And then, as soon as he says whatever, fill in the blank, I'm like, dang it, you're right. I've been trying to work that out all day.
That's not fair, right? Like, I don't appreciate that. Like,
yes.
I think, and that's probably the difference between a therapist and a spouse, right? The therapist has to spend up to 6 to 8 months to allow you to slowly walk to that conclusion yourself. And then they pretend
like it's a surprise.
Yeah. Well, like, they're like, you've made a great breakthrough. Our spouses, look at their watches like, okay, I'm going to shortcut this because I have got a list of things that you want me to do. And the only way this is going to happen is if I stop this right now and we cut right to the chase.
Yep. And go.
Although, okay, to be fair, I've stopped this habit, but there was a series of time where I would be talking with Hubs and I would just look at him and be like, okay, fast forward. Just fast forward. Like,
let's do this.
Right. Like, this exposition's fantastic, or was 5 minutes ago, but I'm done with it. I already know the conclusion. Like, let's just get there.
Can we move on?
And oof, that nothing shortcuts that conversation directly to a fight like that.
Oh, I am quite certain you're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we just take the hard exit off the freeway onto Fight Town. And
yeah, my favorite thing that Ian says is like 30 minutes into whatever we're talking about, and he knows I've lost interest at least 20 minutes ago. He'll stop and look at me and go, how long ago did you stop listening? Oh, like days ago. Is that why you're agreeing? Because like you're actually done. Like, it's not that you think I'm right, it's that you're quite finished with this conversation. Yes. Okay, great.
Smart man.
And then he just moves on, and I'm like, thanks for that, because I don't know what we're talking about anymore. Like, I tuned out a long time ago. I don't know if he maybe just sees my eyes glaze over, or that I've rubbed my eye 52 times. whatever
There-
social cues I can be giving.
There was a friend who had the it was infuriating, but you'd be talking with him and he'd look at you and he'd go, you're losing me, Wall. And
Yep.
as he would, I mean, it was just like when he turned his head and said Wall and like looked away from you as he said it, it was just like you wanted to backhand him at that moment. But later on, I mean, I would just bust up laughing because
What are you gonna do?
I mean, you explain that to somebody and they're just like, he did what?
No, he's just calling it, man. I know I'm about to lose it. And it's gone.
Yeah, I don't know.
I can appreciate that friend.
So we didn't Rochambeau before this to see who would go first.
You do want to Rochambeau now?
I don't know why that answer takes so long for me to come up with one because I'm like, do I want to? Like, do I want to just be like, I guess I was expecting you to just make the decision, be like, I'll go, or no, by all means.
Do go on.
Right?
I
Like,
mean, like, here's the thing. I'm cool either way. So, I mean, if you want me to make the decision, I'll make the decision and be like, madam, the floor is yours. Like, I want to hear your story. You've got me. You told me that I most certainly have never heard this story. And at first I was like, how dare you? And then I was like, okay, bring it. Maybe I haven't.
I like it was just like, what? I can't believe this. I'm indignant.
Yeah, outraged. And then went, oh, that would be cool. I like this.
All right. Well, on that note, I guess I will go. So I did tell you to remind me, and because I said, hey, remind me, that means I suddenly remembered.
That's how it works.
Right. That there is a slight trigger warning. I mean, I'm going to say that like, so there's an element to this case that could deal with sexual assault. And with that said, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I mean, I could just gloss completely over it as I tell the story. So, but I do want to surface that because that is something that could pop up. So if that is something that bothers you, it's going to be done like not very in depth, like, but I want to surface that, all of that to say. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about the woman who was dubbed Mrs. Sherlock Holmes.
I love this. I don't know this story.
Okay. So my sources, Grace Quackenbush, also known as Grace Humiston, or
Nope.
Quackenbos. Okay. Sorry.
It's not real.
Okay. So this woman, Grace, she has a couple names because she marries a couple times. She has quite a few articles in the New York Times that were written about her during her time, like 1917, around that.
Okay.
There's also a book called Mrs. Sherlock Holmes by Brad Rika. And Brad Rika, I actually heard an interview of him on the Wicked Words podcast. And that's kind of what started my whole like, oh, and so I went and got the book. There's also an article from the Three Village Historical Society, Mary Grace Quackenbos Humiston, Mrs. Sherlock Holmes by Tara May. There's an article on the Smithsonian Magazine. Mrs. Sherlock Holmes takes on the NYPD when an 18-year-old girl went missing. The police let the case grow cold, but Grace Humiston, a soft-spoken private investigator, wouldn't let it lie by Karen Abbott. It's a long title.
I am so excited.
Okay. So the story's going to bounce around a tiny bit at first, and then it's going to kind of go into a flow, and there's probably going to be moments where I just riff on it. So that's what happens when you do a ton of research. You're like, okay, but wait, hold on. There's more.
Oh, dude.
Okay. So I'm probably going to bounce back and forth between calling her Mary Grace Quackenbos Humiston, which is her full name, or Grace Quackenbos, or Grace Humiston. And that's just going to happen because so many things were written about her, and each one was written at a different point in time, and so there's different variations of her name, and so sometimes they'll do the full, like, this is the full thing, and it's Quackenbos Humiston is going to be something I'm going to trip on the entire time, so I'm going to try to avoid as much tripping as possible.
I agree, because that's quite a handle.
She was the first female assistant United States attorney. She was appointed to her position before women were legally allowed to vote in the country. And
good
as
honor.
Right? Like,
I love that.
And she weighs in on women's suffrage and the right to vote in very interesting ways. Like she's friends with very famous suffragettes who are leading the cause, but she herself makes the statements like, I don't have time to concern myself with the politics and voting and things like that. Like,
Good for you, but not my thing, man.
yeah, it's like, I'm not going to speak to this. I'm too busy. It was just like, wow, okay. It's kind of interesting. And she ends up becoming, so she starts her career as an attorney and later becomes a highly sought investigator, earning the nickname Mrs. Sherlock Holmes.
Okay.
She's born September 17th, 1869 in New York, and her father's a well-to-do merchant. He ends up becoming a very prominent layman in the Baptist church. She's the great niece of Admiral Hall, and her grandfather is Henry S. Hall, who was the partner to William Lloyd Garrison of, anti-slavery fame.
Okay.
So
Okay.
she's got quite a bit of wealth. She is at that point one of three kids. She ends up inheriting her family's estate when her brother is institutionalized. And she refers to him, like when people ask about her brother, she says that he's died. Like, so it's the time where you don't acknowledge mental health in the family to the point where they are
Gotcha. Okay.
disinherited and all that kind of stuff, which is a very big bummer. But it kind of shows and depicts a lot of that nuance and complexity of the time.
Yes.
And so
And is equally sad.
it is, and that's kind of one of the things that make her a complex character. She herself she doesn't talk a lot about herself and spends more time talking about her work. And so when you hear a nugget about who she is or her actual life, you go, I'm sorry, what?
Say that again one time.
Yeah. In 1888, she graduates from Hunter College in New York, and this is when she inherits quite a bit of money. And in 1907, there's a New York Times article that says that she heads to law school so she could learn to better manage her estate.
Okay, get it, girl.
Right. Like, I personally probably wouldn't enroll myself in a 3-year program. I would highly likely just seek out some legal advice, pay a couple $100, call it a day. So it seems like it's a very interesting way that her mind processes things. And what's interesting is she chooses to go to a school that will allow women in law school, but because of policies in place, she can only attend the school at night with, quote, less desirable students, women and immigrants.
Right.
And the class is taught, she's in class in winter, and all of the women in the class were seated underneath the skylight. And as a prank, some of the male students opened the window and it doused them in snow and rain.
Oh, how nice of them.
Right. And so now the women are forced to sit there freezing, trying to learn. It's after this that Grace Quackenbos sits in the front row.
Good on her.
Yeah, she's like, I'm done. She impresses the dean of the school, who's teaching that class, Dean Ashley, and he urges Quackenbos to stop taking evening classes, to start taking day classes as well. So she ends up graduating in only 2 years. She ranks 7th in her class and receives her Bachelor of Law in 1903.
Good for her.
Yep.
I love that.
It's at this point she starts working for the Legal Aid Society for a year, and then she's accepted into the bar. And then in 1905, she founds the People's Law Firm.
Okay.
And she is just off from there because she is primarily focused on working immigrants cases and the working poor. And within 2 years, she's opened a pair of offices. She's working on Broadway and on Madison Avenue, and her reputation's growing.
And her reputation precedes her.
Oh my gosh, does it? There's one case that really kind of sets her apart. And it is in defense of this woman, Mrs. Antoinette Tola, an Italian woman in New Jersey who draws media attention. And what is fascinating is that there were a group of women from Wesley College that hear about this case. And they hear about this woman on death row, and they surface her case to Quackenbos, and they're like, you need to handle this because this is nuts. Tola had been convicted of murder of a man named Joseph Santa, and was scheduled to be hanged when Quackenbos took the request of the Italian consul general, who offered her a substantial fee. So he offers all this money and she works pro bono, and as she did for many years, noting that she would prefer to take a
Oh,
case.
right, because she is already has the inheritance, so she technically
Right.
isn't really, she doesn't need. Okay, I
Yeah.
don't know why that was. I needed to say that. I just had to work that out.
Okay. But like one of the, like she would work cases basically for what people could pay. And if you were poor, they would say like, I'll bake bread for you. Great, break bread for me, or bake bread for me. You know what?
I
I
love
sew
this.
clothes. I'm gonna sew clothes for you. Great, fantastic. Make them all black. Cause she wore all black. Cause she gets married,
Mm.
and as she, like, right after she gets married, her dad dies, and then her mom dies. And then this is a sidebar. Then there is insinuation that her husband, who was a doctor, had peepholes that he was looking at patients in his practice with. They get a divorce. Now, again, this is all sidebar, right? Like, she's very tight-lipped about this. So she just starts dressing in all black, and that's just her thing. Like the mourning veils, the whole nine.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
She is the OG goth babe.
Oh my gosh. So just keep that in mind, like as she becomes this big, so big for, whatever. But her quote is, she would prefer to take the case without renumera as woman for woman.
Get it. I love
Right?
that.
Like she is here to help, and she's just not going to deal. And it helps being independently wealthy.
Absolutely.
So by the time she takes up this case, her firm had 550 pending cases, and she'd already employed four attorneys and two stenographers.
Good on her.
Yeah. And she's like
Hmm.
fresh out of school, like, so this is just nuts that she's already garnering so much attention. Her team works quickly and well. And for 7 days after officially taking the case, Quackenbos convinces the Board of Pardons of New Jersey to commute Tola's death sentence to a prison term of 7.5 years. She successfully argued that Tola had killed Santa in self-defense, and in that previous testimony had not been properly translated. So they didn't have court. Well, they had court translators, but they weren't to the level that we have today. It's just like, can you speak Italian? Yeah.
Yeah, my great uncle was Italian. Yeah.
Good enough. Come on in here.
Yeah. Okay.
And so as a result, like, there's some things that just don't translate well. And so then this woman, like the judge at one point in the testimony made a statement like that got her convicted before Humiston was brought in, that no, because they had said that Santa, the murder victim, was armed and she was defending herself. And the comment was, his gun had never been found. Not that he was unarmed, there was no gun. It was like, what do you mean it's never been found? That's a weird statement. Let's dig into, let's double tap on that.
Well, yeah, because it implies that you know that there for sure was a gun. We just haven't found it yet.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
sure enough, they find, like, she goes to the medical examiner and she says, hey, I'm going to need to know what were all the belongings that were with him. And one of the things was a gun. Now, Tola's testimony makes sense that it was self-defense, because the original conviction said that she had fired the shot from the back of the head.
Ooh.
And when the medical examiner looks at it, it's like, no, from the face. Like, she
Oh.
was defending herself. And so Santa had been trying to make all of these advances on her and say that he was going to do all of these things. And she tells her husband, and her husband confronts Santa, and Santa's like, look, I'm wealthy. I'm the one who paid to bring you here. Like, if I decide your wife is valuable and desirable, that's what it is. And so this guy
Ugh.
kind of walks away, this tail tucked between his legs. So she goes to Santa's wife, and Santa's wife's like, get a gun, scare him. And so she's like, what? My husband's not doing anything, because Santa will, accost her in front of her husband. The wife's like, what do you want me to do? And
Yeah,
so
like,
she's
how do you
like,
want me to handle this?
what am I going to do? So she gets a gun and she goes to, like, frighten him. And he makes the comment like, I've got one too. What do you like? I'm okay. And he's drunk. And
Of
okay. So
course.
anyhow, he accosts her. She shoots him. She runs out of the house screaming. Then she's convicted. Um, all of that.
In that order.
Yeah. Okay. So with all of that in mind, Quackenbos argues successfully that Tola had killed in self-defense and that her previous testimony hadn't been properly translated. And it was March 9th, and Tola had been scheduled to be hanged on March 12th.
Oh,
Like just right at the 11th hour. And she's uninterested in notoriety. Quackenbos did not rest on her laurels, but continues to build her practice despite having 550 pending cases. Like she just keeps getting bigger and better. She strove to assist anyone who needed her expertise, stating in an interview that, quote, "We give the same attention to all of our clients, but charge each according to his means. If our clients are rich, we charge them regular level rates. Of course, that is why we can ask lower fees from the poor. This policy drew the downtrodden and the desperate to her."
he's like the equalizer of the 19th century.
Oh my gosh. Like the more I read about her, the more I was just like, this woman is amazing. And the people who come to her, they tend to go to her when they realize the police are just not going to help or not able to help or not interested. Like you pick. During the first years of her law firm, she sees several clients who are researching friends and relatives who've gone to the South for work opportunities and then vanished.
Okay.
And rather than her hiring an investigator, she decides to look into it herself.
Because if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself.
Exactly. And after her initial inquiry, she discovers a network of New York City recruitment agents who lured laborers to the South, where they ensnared their workers in a system called peonage. Are you familiar?
I'm going to assume this is some type of like, I want like indentured servitude.
Yes, yes. Although it was most like peonage tends to like peonage in the US tended to be more rampant in the turpentine camps.
Okay.
Quackenbos discovers that it was a fairly common practice in a variety of industries. And she decides to travel alone and she begins this clandestine examination. She's donning disguises and she's stowing away on supply wagons to infiltrate these camps. She ends up posing often as an old woman selling scissors and a magazine writer. And it's so bizarre to me. Like, these are just the most like, okay, this is so non sequitur. They'll never suspect the scissor seller.
She would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you muggling kids.
When she returns from her first trip, she ends up coming back home with a fever and 46 affidavits against the perpetrators of the peonage system. So she just like is.
I like you had to add that
unrelenting.
she had a fever. Like,
oh, sicker than a dog, but didn't come home and rest first. Like she, like just in a fever dream, completed.
I love it. Okay.
So this catches the attention of the Department of Justice, and they open an investigation. At which point, Assistant Attorney General Charles Wells Russell personally travels to the South to conduct an inquiry. The Justice Department is so impressed with Quackenbos' work that they appoint her as a Special Assistant United States Attorney for the South District of New York. She was the first woman to have this job, and this was 13 years before women gained the right to vote.
It is so cool.
Her responsibilities are centered around identifying and prosecuting peonage schemes and in the industry trust. Her responsibilities center around identifying and prosecuting peonage schemes and industry trust busting.
Every time you say peonage. Sorry.
I'm glad you're 12, and it's like,
I'm so sorry.
I made the comment yesterday to Hubs that, he acts his shoe size.
Yes, I'm 4.5. Mm-hmm.
I mean, although, okay, Hubs, like, he's like, yeah, I told you I'd never mature past, 10. And then I made a joke and I was like, but yeah, there was that 2-year period where you decided to wear shoes that were size 10. Like, he was gifted a box of shoes that were size 10 from a friend who, just like loves to be in the latest fashion. And he decided to Cinderella his foot into those shoes for 2 years and wear them nonstop. And so when he started to develop feet pain, this was right at the height of COVID, he had convinced himself that apparently he'd gotten COVID and not known it. And as a result, had developed what he called his COVID toe.
Oh my God, I love him.
And then like later on, it was like he went to a doctor and they said, "No, good sir, that is a bunion. Like you've literally just forced your feet in shoes too small, like you are a fashionista. Maybe you should be kinder to yourself and wear this brace and wear shoes that fit."
I
Suddenly,
love just the image I have of Mike sitting there on the doctor's table being told, nope, that's a bunion.
yeah, nope, these shoes are 2 sizes too small. You are like the Grinch in the Grinch's heart.
I love him.
Hmm. Okay, so that was a weird side note. Anyhow, the peonage probes, they take Quackenbos abroad as well. Like, because again, she's got all the money in the free world. She can travel anywhere. So she travels through Europe and parts of the Middle East, pursuing these leads to build her case. And that's when she unearths an extensive ring of exploitation all throughout all of these countries that are enticing individuals to immigrate to the US where they're going to be trapped in peonage.
Got it.
Because
Okay.
it's a bunch of people trying to perpetuate slavery.
Right. In
Mm-hmm.
some fashion or another. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And then in another instance, Baron Edmondo de Planches, I have butchered that, the Italian ambassador to the US, he asks her to look into the treatment of Italians working on a cotton plantation in Mississippi. And Quackenbos targets Sunnyside Plantation that's owned by a dude who's got the creepiest name, O.B. Crittenden, for this
That is
investigation.
creepy.
I mean, it's just designed to, raise the hairs on the back of your neck. And she dispatches an undercover investigator to sneak onto the plantation at night. She spends her time when she visits in the shacks of the immigrants and drinks the polluted water that they're drinking as she's gathering evidence. So, as all of this is happening with proper motivation, the threat of prison, one of the labor agents divulges that the company has tons of dubious labor practices because it's involved to be like, okay, you're taking kind of the idea of like a sharecropper, where it's like you work this land, and if this land's profitable, then you get that money. The problem
Right.
is we're going to charge you for every little thing, and you will never be out of debt.
Right. And we're gonna own you for the rest of forever.
Right. And so as she's like touring the land, like she ends up, this guy Percy is giving her, and you're going to hear about Leroy Percy because he is just gross. He's talking about all like how profitable the company is, how everybody underneath him is doing so well. And when he's walking with her and he's giving her the tour, everybody's happy and smiling, and there's children running free and everything like that. But he won't let her stay the night there. And it's a 2-hour journey to where he forces her to sleep. And then it's 2 hours to get back in the morning. So he's got tons of time to set everything up and get everybody, all the paid actors in place.
Right.
So when she finally sneaks onto there and starts like meeting the real people who do live there, the real people who are suffering, she gets a very different story.
As you would.
Right. So it ends up being just awful. And at one point, Leroy Percy is the one who's, really implicated in all of this. He is a cotton planter, a lawyer, and he's a local political leader. And he fancies himself untouchable. He ends up, as she's building this case against him, raiding her hotel room or having somebody raid her hotel room. And he uncovers all of her affidavits and he steals all of them. She comes back, sees her room
As you
tossed,
do.
and all of her information's missing. And she's like, oh crap, what am I going to do?
Please
And
tell me
then,
she had copies.
no, there were no
Oh,
copies. Later on, that's when the information's returned to her as by a different political figure. And it was just like, I found these from a dubious character, and I am taking the time to return them to you. And
Please
she,
reward me for my kindness.
right. And she knows that it was all, a big ruse just to make sure that Percy knew exactly the information that he had or that she had on him, and that she couldn't go to the police, even though she knew exactly what happened.
Right. Okay.
So it's gross. Percy also appeals to his good friend, President Theodore Roosevelt, for relief as she's persecuting him.
Of course.
And she gets removed from the investigation at Sunnyside, and the press has already gotten a hold of the story, and her report ends up getting published. And that's when the Italian government starts warning its citizens against moving to the Delta region. And this causes some negative impact on people immigrating to the South because apparently they don't want to be stuck in slavery.
What?
I know.
That's weird.
And Percy continues to run a smear campaign against Quackenbos, disparaging her basically just on the virtue of her character and gender. Well, not character, but gender.
As you do.
Right. And then it's at this point, like in the book, that there is an excerpt that was written about her in a newspaper that was basically said that she wasn't supposed to outshine men. Her job as a woman is supposed basically to stay pregnant in the kitchen. But they did it in a poem form where it rhymes. So, it's classy.
Oh, okay. Well, that's cool.
It's classy. And it's just, she's basically, so this isn't the only time that she's denigrated for being a woman. But the good news is that she benefited, as we've said a couple of times, from the security of having her own money, her education, her employment. And this is really uncommon considering it's 1917, not even 1917, it's like 1915 or so. Another thing that she did is she ends up suing an insurance company on behalf of a group of widows who were owed benefits. And they're afraid to call out the corruption in her profession. And Quackenbos, she gets an attorney, an immigration lawyer, disbarred because there's a lot of things that are happening. Like if you're fighting a deportation charge at the time, you're only allowed to legally charge your client $10 for filing that appeal and then to send that appeal to DC. There's a dude named Caesar Barra who charges many times over the amount. Some clients were charged over 100. And Quackenbos, like, not only does he take this money, he also doesn't guarantee that he'll win or guarantee that he'll pay it back.
Oh,
and
nice
so,
of him.
Yeah, he could just be a jerk face, lose,
about the
and
whole
then,
thing.
Yeah, and then you're stuck out of money. So she learns about this and she takes the case, and Barra dares her to, quote, crack the whip. And so she does. And she ends up recouping all of the money that he had taken from all of his clients and successfully gets his license revoked.
Good for her.
So she just doesn't mess around.
She's the definition of F around and find out.
Oh my gosh. And then it ends up getting worse when the case that really makes her famous is this girl named Ruth Kruger who goes missing in New York. And this is 1916 at this point. This girl, she is this 18-year-old girl. She's part of an immigrant family that's well-to-do. They have quite a bit of money, and they live in a nice apartment. And she goes to get her ice skates sharpened, and she never comes home. And her family starts looking for her, and her sister thinks, well, maybe she went ice skating, right? Because she did get her ice skates sharpened, and she's not at the ice rink. And so maybe I'll ask the guy who sharpened the skates. She goes down. Apparently you get your ice skates sharpened at a motorcycle shop because everybody had different ways to make side hustles. And there's not like a dedicated ice skate sharpener shop.
I mean, I guess that checks.
Yeah. And he admits that he saw a very handsome girl or attractive girl and that she did pick up skates, but that was the last time she saw her. But the first time she goes to that motorcycle shop, the shop's closed and it's normal business hours and he's not there. But when she finally sees him, he's like, oh yeah, I think I saw her, but whatever. And the police, they start an investigation, but it ends up kind of being half-assed. And it's just gross because the father is just trying everything he can to get her information out there and get all of this happening. But the police are saying things like, well, maybe she ran away with a boyfriend or eloped or, women just
Any number
leave.
of things.
Yeah, like she's probably in a house for wayward women giving birth right now. Like all of the things, all of the things. And so Kruger ends up getting frustrated by the inertia or the inertia of NYPD's investigation. And the case goes cold, and he ends up hiring this Grace Humiston to take the case over. At this point, she's remarried. And
When did she
as
have time?
I don't know. I really don't know. And because she's not at home making pot roast. Like in the Kruger case, she's working upwards to 18 hours a day.
That's like, at what point do you even meet someone? Like,
yeah, you tell me. I don't know.
it was probably her DoorDasher. I bet you.
I mean, you would think, right? So the dad Kruger ends up reaching out to Grace Quackenbos or Humiston now, and at this point, the newspapers are saying that that Ruth Kruger, the person, was likely a victim of white slavery. Is that a phrase you've heard of?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so they're saying that, she's an attractive teenager, that if she didn't run away, she's basically in sex trafficking. And that's it is what it is. Sucks to be her. And we're so upset with all of these immigrant men coming in and stealing our beautiful white women.
That checks.
Yeah. And so Humiston, she decides this is it. She's takes this case. She ends up publicly accusing the police of a lot of negligence. And she starts really diving in and looking into this case. She ends up hiring a Hungarian investigator who is amazing and such a character unto himself, whose last name is Kron. And to get in and to really investigate the Ruth Kruger murder, because she really believes that the guy who owns the motorcycle shop, Alfred Kochi, is the one who he's the last one to see her. So they really need to investigate that. And of course, Kochi disappears. He immediately absconds to Italy, leaving his wife and children. And
he's the ice skating repairman.
Exactly. Okay. And the woman who runs, his wife, who ends up taking over the shop, she ends up letting people investigate. And she's like, I'm done. You've chased him away. I'm here being a single mom now because of you. Just leave my poor Al alone. And so to get into the shop, Grace ends up having her friend Kron come in and apply to be the motorcycle repairman.
But he has never seen a motorcycle in his life.
He does not have a clue. So he goes in and he spends his days moving the different parts of the motorcycle around. And it's a very simple motorcycle at this time. They're not, the high-end BMWs that we have today, or Ducatis or whatever. And then at night, he goes home and reads the manuals on how to actually do the repairs.
That's so cool.
And so he starts doing all of these repairs. And at one point, he needs to file something down, I think it's a spoke or something. And he knows that Mrs. Kochi won't let him into the cellar, into the basement, where he really wants to explore, because he feels like that's where all the clues are pointing. And he's like, well, I know that I need to get this filed down, and I can't use the tools that you have, so I'm going to go to the blacksmith shop. And Mrs. Kochi at this point is like, you know what, fine, just go down to the basement, just use the tool. So he goes down to the basement, and because he's a federally trained investigator, he goes down there and he is looking all around. He's looking for things like fresh nails. Because if it's a bright, shiny nail, he knows that that's a new addition that's been put up. He doesn't see anything. It's impeccably clean. There's a really large workbench, but not a whole lot else. And while he's down there, he realizes he's down there too long, and he hits that pit in his stomach, and he goes, oh no, I've now been made. And he hears Mrs. Kochi upstairs screaming, I know, you've been found out. I know who you are. You're the reason. You've chased my husband away. You were one of them.
Right.
And he comes upstairs and he calls that the low point in his career, knowing that he let Mrs. Humiston down.
Oh.
But at that point, he knows it's the basement. He can't prove it, but he knows what they're looking for is in the basement. So they spend a ton of time really trying to get into that basement. And they end up doing things like petitioning the city to dig up the sidewalk and to dig up the coal chute next to the like everything immediately within an inch to get down there and to see if they can find stuff. And they can't find anything. So as all of this is going on, at one point, like they hit this wall and they realize that they're out of things. And Kron is like, I can't do anymore. This is it. This is the end of the investigation. Like I can't get into the cellar that I need to. And Grace walks up with the deed to the motorcycle shop in her hand.
Because sister bought it.
Sister bought it. And she had spent so much time going through third parties to make sure the sale went without people knowing it was her.
Mm-hmm.
That by the time, like, and so she's running 2 investigations. She's like, okay, I'm gonna have Kron do his thing. And while he's digging up everything that he possibly can, and I'm fighting all these court cases, I'm also going to try to be buying the property through a third party. And it is incredible that she's able to pull that off. Well, they get down there into the basement, and it takes some strong people to move this workbench, and underneath it they find a door that's just been laid flat against the ground. They pull it up, and there's the body.
Why keep it?
Where is he going to put it, right?
I mean, I guess, yeah.
So they find the decomposed body of Ruth Kruger. It had been in the basement the entire time. The police who had searched that place had never moved the workbench.
I mean, yeah, okay.
And then during the investigation, it comes out that the motorcycle division had given Mrs. Koch and Alfred Koch these cards that basically said, like, if he was caught doing something, speeding or whatever, they were to give these cards to the police officer. And it said, like, be kind to him. He's one of us, or not one of us, but treat him well.
Get out of jail free card.
Exactly.
Motorcycle division, like a motorcycle club, or
no, the motorcycle cops.
Okay.
And they ended up in the investigation after this, when Grace Humiston comes to the media and was just like, look, I had all of the clues that they did, but I found her and they couldn't. And so then the police chief and the mayor, they do this full-on investigation, and it comes to find out that the motorcycle cops were running this scam where they would pull somebody over, they would give them a ticket, and they would say, like, gosh, if you wanted to get this fixed, you could really go talk to our man, Alfred Koch, at the motorcycle shop, and he'll deal with it. And so they would go to Alfred Koch and allow him to repair their bike or whatever for, a fee that was kicked back to the police, and the police would erase all of their information on the ticket and then reissue the same ticket.
Okay. Like, just over and over again.
Over and over again. And so because this was just a money laundering scheme, truly, well, not laundering, but, extortion scheme, they had this symbiotic relationship where everybody, fed off of
everybody else. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's why they protected Koch. So when the investigations were going on, the police were like, oh, he's fine. He's a good old man. Don't worry about him.
Ugh, I want.
Mm-hmm. Now, the good news about this is that Koch is found in Bologna in Italy, and he is arrested, and he's held in this dungeon of a cell, and he is tried in Italy for the death of Ruth Kruger, and he is found guilty. And his testimony of the case is hair-raising, because he just recounts, and he's got several different accounts of how he did it, why he did it, and you get a different version depending on what frame of mind he's in and how truthful he wants to be. But it's not okay. It is so disturbing. But back to Humiston, after the Kruger case in July of 1917, she's named a special investigator to the New York City Police Department, despite the fact that she has put so much egg on their face and made them look so bad in the papers. They are left with no choice but to hire her. So
she's clearly better than them.
Yes. And they're trying to really help their own integrity in the public eye. She does this for no budget, which is nuts, because she's like, look, I'm just going to do this, and my main goal is to trace all of these missing girls. And her main goal was uncovering evidence of, white slavery traffic. And that ends up really being her undoing, because she kept believing that there was this huge white slaver ring. And it ends up that, there was a lot of really awful things happening, but it wasn't orchestrated by some big master plan. And she just, yeah.
Okay, got it.
And so she really gets hung up on that, and that ends up becoming her undoing, which is kind of a bummer, but she does a lot of really good things. She ends up trying to start this Morality League of America, where she's trying to create these places for girls to, live and act and be in community with others and not be subject to all of these base things. She ends up trying to help hundreds of families who are trying to find their missing daughters and sisters. And one line that really bummed me out was the Kruger murder brought Grace Humiston into the national renown, but she, along with other scores of other prominent progressive era reformers, were eventually lost to history. Later newspaper recollections of the Kruger case failed to mention Mrs. Sherlock Holmes at all.
That's devastating.
Yeah, considering that she is the attorney turned investigator who broke the whole thing open. She dies in 1948 at the age of 77. And she's memorialized as being twice married, first to Major Henry Forrest Quackenbos and then Howard Donald Humiston. She dedicated her life to fight for justice. Mrs. Sherlock Holmes left a notable legacy as the groundbreaking female lawyer and impactful social reformer.
I love her.
Mm-hmm.
What a legend. Like, how BA do you have to be to just, you know what? I know the clue is here. I'm just going to buy the house. Like,
yeah. Well, and she's noted, like, when she's called Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, she's like, look, I really don't like that because he uses deduction. I don't believe in deduction. I believe in just pursuing the case in front of you. It's just common sense. That's what you're working with.
Oh, she's impressive, I gotta say.
Yeah, you don't need a Dr. Watson. You just need common sense.
I'm like, I need a Dr. Watson.
I need a stream of medical professionals, when I'm honest.
Like, if we're being honest here.
Yeah, like I need and have an entire medical team of people being like, no.
Sit down. Sit.
Have you tried water? You should try water.
Have you had a nap today?
Vitamin D?
You eaten?
Oh.
They get you every time.
I know. Like, I'm really just a plant.
Here we are.
Mm-hmm.
What a legend. I am gonna have to do some reading on her. What a badass. I'm so excited.
So yes, I really recommend Brad Rika, Mrs. Sherlock Holmes. Great book. Okay. The audiobook is pretty good. It is interesting because, like, the killer's name, Alfred Kochi, is spelt Kochi, but the audio speaker, presenter, reader, the narrator, he says Koki as he's using it. And so it's been a lot of mental work on my end to say Kochi, because it's Cocchi. Kochi.
Okay.
And like, I even re-listened to the podcast where the author talked about the story, and he referred to the perpetrator as Kochi.
Okay.
And so I'm going with Kochi, but it's very hard when you listen to 12 hours of Koki.
Right. Yeah. Oh gosh. I'm gonna tell you, this is totally on track with that. I tried to make a TikTok the other day, and I couldn't do it because I couldn't say the name of the individual without sounding so fake. So now that I can say it, I periodically through my house just announce exclusious like out of the blue, because it's just what pops in my mind and I can say it. But when I was trying to make the TikTok, it was not happening without me sounding like the world's fakest human being on the planet.
I love the TikToks where you get the person who starts trying to be like Mr. Dan Rather and to do the whole thing and then like has the breakdown when they're trying to say the word. They include the outtakes.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's like today on the news we have
Yeah. I mean, I never made it through like the first sentence. I tried like 6 times, and then finally I was like, I can't do this today.
these
So I
things
told Ian,
happen.
I was like, I need you to just hold my phone and record me so I can sound like I'm talking to, like I'm talking to you. So I'm gonna be real about it and not just sound like this. Oh my
Inclusion.
gosh. Right. He's like, oh my God, babe, you're fine. So I'll try again later.
We are our hardest critics.
In fact, yes, you're absolutely right about that.
There is a line from NF in a song that he has. He said, "I'm my own worst critics, so critics step your hate game up."
Yeah, man, come on, get it together. I can
Like,
out critic you any day.
right, like that's all you got. Like harder. Take your best shot. Like I'm done with this. Like just
Trust me, I've already won. Like,
like I've already kicked my own ass in this one.
kicking my own ass. Oh goodness, I'm so excited. I love her.
Mhm.
I cannot wait to. I'm trying to remember her full name, like commit it to memory.
Grace.
Grace
Well, so her first name is Mary, but she goes by Grace. So Grace Quackenbos Humiston.
Humiston. I just wanted to stop at hummus. Like, obviously, I'm thinking about food now. I'm just.
And I think if you search Mrs. Sherlock Holmes, you could find her
Oh, okay.
because I've looked for her enough. Now my computer goes, "Oh yeah, we know who you mean."
Like, we got this.
Um,
We got
but
it.
at first it was like, "Do you mean the landlord who oversaw Baker
She's
Street?"
not Mrs. Sherlock Holmes.
No. And I'm like, "No, that's not it." But
Get it together, Google.
right. Google, you're drunk. Go home.
Where's Bing?
Yeah. I need DuckDuckGo.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness.
So I think my story ended up taking quite a bit. So how about we call that one and
Okay.
then we come back for yours? So if you've enjoyed this and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I can't wait to hear what Angie has to say, if it's going to be on the same line or, adjacent to or as fun and entertaining, and what the hell did I just hear? Then, rate, review, subscribe to this podcast, and reach out to us because we actually have this email address where we allow you to send us your thoughts. And maybe it should be Koki and not Kochi. And I am completely, misguided in how I should say that. And you can tell me this. You can tell me what you were screaming at your computer or your phone or the stereo this entire time. And you can do so at unhinged.historypod@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.